Thank you for joining us for today's episode of The Real Spill, a podcast where I spill on all things multifamily advocacy and how we as industry professionals can work with our elected officials, stakeholders, and allies to bring about change for the rental housing industry. My guests are subject matter experts whose unique perspectives will help listeners understand how the issues impact them. Let's get into The Real Spill. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of The Real Spill here on the Multifamily Media Network. And I am thrilled to have with me today Greenville City Councilwoman Dorothy Dowe. Welcome, Dorothy.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. And thank you for recording, especially on Election Day. People won't see this until a couple of weeks from now, but it is Election Day in our country.
It is. It's a big day.
Absolutely. And Dorothy and I were just talking offline a bit about how monumental today is, not only for our country, but for women. We haven't always had the right to vote, and we are expressing our desire that everyone get out and exercise their civic right today. And one thing I wanted to open it up with, if you're here in Greenville, of course, our listeners are from all across the country, but if you're here in Greenville, of course, on September the 27th, you'll know that we experienced an unprecedented storm in our area, and that was Hurricane Helene. And in her aftermath, there is a lot of debris and a lot of cleanup that's going on. That's been a topic of conversation in our city council meetings and on social media platforms. So wanted to give you the opportunity, Dorothy, to speak on that for just a minute.
You know, we had a plan in place for such a disaster and executed that plan exactly as we intended to. I think, there's a real hats off to our staff. They've been working. I think this is the first week some of the people in our public works group have had even a day off. And if you recall, we had a microburst in the downtown area about 2 days ahead of Helene. So really for us, it started on the Tuesday before. We have now just got a report actually from the city manager that we have made a first pass on every city street. We will not quit till every bit of debris from the storm is picked up. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And I think we have a visual of the amount of debris that's going to be picked up fills about 15 football fields stacked 10 feet high. So that's how much has to be gathered. And I think we've just crossed through maybe the high 200,000 cubic yards. So we're making progress, and I expect us to be completely finished with debris cleanup by middle of December. Very well, the vast majority before Thanksgiving, but we'll be doing a final pass by the middle of December.
That's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. And if constituents follow you on Instagram and on social media, you've done such an amazing job of keeping out in front of this. Like, you're letting them know what's happening in real time, what they can expect. That's very much appreciated.
I'm glad you brought it up because I communicate to constituents in multiple ways. For short lead time items, time sensitive, such as storm recovery, that I use social media. So I'm on Instagram at Dowe Dorothy, Facebook, Dorothy Dowe Greenville City Council, and LinkedIn, Dorothy Dowe Greenville City Council. So those are the day-to-days, the easy time-sensitive snippets. For longer communication, I issue a quarterly newsletter. And I did have some people say, "Hey, Dorothy, how come you're not communicating about the story?" But I said, boy, am I communicating, but it's on social media. And that's because the distribution of my newsletter is so large. Every time it's issued, it's an expenditure. And I have to be cautious about how, resources and spending on that. So for things like short-term items and storm, the storm, every day was different. That's the platform I use. And that's why I always try to encourage people to follow me on at least one of those platforms or have a significant other that does follow it, because I respect not everybody wants to be on social media. But that's the way that I communicate to the 70,000 people of Greenville, and as well as stakeholders on top of that.
Absolutely. And that's how I first met you, was through social media. And of course, I chaired the Upper State Apartment Association's Government Affairs Council and try to practice what I preach. Although I'm in the county, I've told our members, please reach out to elected officials. They want to hear from their constituents and stakeholders, those that do business within the city, which our industry, the multifamily industry, is all over the city and county of Greenville. And you were so responsive and met with myself and our committee member, John Maudlin, to discuss some issues impacting the industry and how we could work together. And it's very much appreciated. My goal in this podcast, too, is replication of the relationship and rapport that we've built because we're all part of the same community. We really, at the end of the day, have very similar ideas and initiatives and goals and outcomes for the best for the citizens.
Yeah, and I think even if we don't have the same goals, for example, or opinions on something, we still, as elected officials, we have to hear from you, to hear your perspective. I bring a perspective as an elected council member, and it's based on my lived experience, right? That could be very different from many of the people I serve. So I've always felt like it was critical for me to listen. I don't turn down a meeting. Those are always really important for people to be able to speak their mind to me or ask for partnership on something, that maybe I hadn't even thought about working on. So I thought, at the end of my time as an elected official, a very telling thing would be how many coffees I've been to, because that's generally the way I like to meet with people. I'd rather it be in person than, a phone call. And so I drink a lot of coffee and meet with a lot of constituents and stakeholders every week.
And it's much appreciated. And it's translated to you being able to attend a couple of Upper State Apartment Association meetings at the Kroc Center, like a forecast breakfast of what we're looking at. You even brought Mr. Brown from the Greenville Housing Fund with you.
Well, y'all provide great data. So obviously in Greenville, multifamily development is on top of mind. It's important for us to know data on multifamily occupancy, just like it's important for us to know data on hotel occupancy. And so those are because our decisions have to be data driven. And I think there's this mystery to somebody who doesn't, isn't involved day to day on that, to think. I hear from constituents all the time, who's living in those multifamily places? Well, it's important for me to have data. I don't need to know the who, but I do need to know how occupied they are. It's the market forces that we have to stay abreast of. That's part of our job.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if there's ever a need for a deep dive into that, we were starting on something with the mayor a couple of years ago because he was receiving the same questions and he told a funny story of a constituent almost complaining of all these developments and who lives there, and then turned right around and said, yeah, my niece is looking for an apartment. And it's like, that's who lives there. It's your average day-to-day folks. So we are absolutely open to continuing that conversation and to assisting with that data if necessary in the future as well. And now,
I think it's important to remember our own, whether you enter the workforce right out of high school or out of the military, or you attended college and then entered the workforce. I don't know many people that graduate from whatever stage they're maxing out on their education, then move right into a home. Typically, they can't afford it, but additionally, they're not prepared to take on such a responsibility. So I feel like the vast majority of people have passed through a stage of life or are still in multifamily living. And so that in of itself explains why it's needed. And the amount of it, that's the developer's job, is to determine how much market demand is there and what should I build to satisfy that market demand.
Absolutely. And just in my experience as a property manager, learning some of those codes and some of the whys and the density, attending those very informational public meetings where there's an open house, like at the Greenville Convention Center, you have the opportunity to go in and ask questions so that you understand what it is that is being decided on. And those are very much appreciated too.
Well, a lot of that ties back to, and I know you have a number of questions, but that will tie back to why I ran in the first place for this seat. And I think we've done a great job over the last I've been on council since 2019, 2020. I was first elected in 2019, but transparency is non-negotiable. And we have to be transparent. We are very transparent, but that's one level of engagement. But then there's another level to where you provide opportunities for the community to be engaged if they choose to to seek out more information and to help them not only get that information, but help them digest it and understand it if they need more explanation. And we are insistent that those opportunities be provided. And it requires a lot of staff time. I try to attend, public meetings like that to, sense the feel of how things are being received by constituents. And so I'm a huge believer in that. I think that has full council support, and I don't expect that to change. We want to do everything we can do. I ran on a platform of providing information, among other things, to help keep citizens informed on the things that affect their quality of life. And so I think we've done a really good job of that on council and through this openness of staff, and we'll continue to do that.
Absolutely. And you provided a great segue there to one of my first questions. We just have organic conversation. And could you share your background before deciding to run for public office?
So I am originally from New York City and went to school in North Carolina and took my first job out of college. I got a degree in mechanical engineering, and I took my first job in mechanical at a paper mill in Mobile, Alabama. So that was the initiation of my career. And I met my husband there in the same paper mill. And we were recruited about 4 or 5 years later to come work for a design engineering firm here in Greenville, South Carolina. It was CRS Serene Engineering Group. I think one thing that I try to explain to people a lot is how Greenville is different. And if you've born and raised and been here all your life and haven't had a chance to live somewhere else, you might not appreciate just quite how welcoming Greenville is. In the city that we came from, I never particularly felt comfortable, as a female mechanical engineer from New York City working in Mobile, Alabama in a paper mill. It was not exactly a great fit. I worked with some great people, but I never really felt fully welcomed there. When my husband and I came to work in Greenville, we immediately felt the difference here, not just from our coworkers at CRS Serene, but also in our neighborhood. And so the house we are in that I speak to you from today is the house we bought right when we moved here, and we've never looked back. And I think it's so important for a community to maintain that. We don't want anyone to feel unwelcome here in Greenville. I don't. And so, bending over backward to make sure people do feel welcome helps our quality of life. It really does. It's who we are and who I, intend to always work to make sure we stay that way. But when you asked about running for office, because it's election day, I can certainly share this. In 2016, following the presidential election, let's just say that did not go the way I wanted it to go. And what I recognized, I identify with the Democratic Party national platform. Being born and raised in New York City, that was probably parental influence, but certainly through my education and time served, in the professional world, that is the party I associated with and still do associate with. Thus, the reason 2016 was not the outcome I had hoped for. I did learn at that time that many races in the upstate were going uncontested. And there was a feeling of people are afraid to run. I had spent a long time as a parent of 2 children in the public school system working in volunteer roles for the entire time they were there. And I frequently was asked to run for school board, but never had much interest in that. It's mostly because of the way the whole funding structure of schools works. And I think I personally would be very frustrated in that job. But I never felt like I wasn't capable of doing it. So following 2016, I recognized we needed to build a bench of qualified candidates in the party that I identified with. And I basically put myself on the bench saying, I'm willing to run. Once you make a decision that you're willing to run for something, what you can run for is very much based on where you live. And so the seat I eventually ran for and won was the at-large seat on city council, a very heavy lift. So I was running against an incumbent, and the city is it was at the time about 70,000 people. That's a lot of people to reach, as someone running for office. And so it took a big ground game, and I built a really long runway. Engineers naturally want to be prepared. All of us probably have a horror story of showing up to an exam where we weren't prepared. In an engineering school, you will pay a price for that. You'll pay a price for it in any major. But because of that, I pride myself on being prepared. So for about 18 months prior to that election, I studied city council. And so I attended all their meetings. I attended all the board and commission meetings. I would attend neighborhood association meetings. I eventually became neighborhood association president just because it was an open role in my neighborhood, and the county square development there's a lot of talk about that. So all that to say is I had a long time to prepare, and then I had a primary, I won that, and then won the election. But all that preparation made me ready day one to serve in the role. So I don't have, I'm glad I did that because I felt very capable, and, at that point, the staff knew who I was essentially. So it was a very smooth transition into.
That's awesome. And in my opinion, you've done such an amazing job. And I mean, Greenville's consistently on top 10 lists. And I can say as a property manager, I would answer the phone and I could almost, you get an instinct about it. People just had heard about Greenville. They wanted to know, what is there to do there? What are the schools like? What are the restaurants like? How welcoming? They're doing their research and coming to our area. And we're very fortunate to have civic leaders such as yourself at the helm and that are strategically planning the future of our city.
Right. And I think it's so critical. All of those things you said are wonderful. And we should be very proud that you have a lot of good news to share for someone who's seeking to come here. What's critical to me is that while everyone will continue to come, that we still protect the quality of life for the people who already live here. And that is something to be worked on every single day. Every day, that has to be what should guide us in every decision making. Are we protecting the quality of life for the people who already live here while welcoming those who are moving here? We have our Greenville 2040 comprehensive plan that's a critical, I call it our North Star. Everything gets back to what does that say about who we want to be and how we want to grow? And is the vote that we're taking or the project that we're deciding on in line with the Greenville 2040 vision that we adopted in 2021?
Absolutely. When that was being spoken about, I was on site as a property manager. I remember listening in to those. It really sparked my interest. And oh, wow, so cities have to grow strategically. And like I said, it's a heavy lift to balance between maintaining the quality of life, that keeping Greenville green, and then having the new people come in.
Absolutely. It's challenging. But I think as a council, we work very well together. The at-large roles, so myself and Councilmember Stahl serve in the at-large roles. And I've always viewed part of my role, first of all, I feel accountable to everybody, right? It's everybody in the city, but also to watch balance across the city. So if we're doing something in this district to the benefit of that district, how are we matching that benefit to this district? There has to be parity across all the geographies. Also, just as important, if something went wrong in this district with a project or whatever it is, let's make sure we don't repeat that mistake in this district. So the overarching view of the city is a huge role for me. Now, there are the individual things going on in different districts that spark my curiosity, that are part of what I ran on, that I stay heavily invested in. But a lot of times it's that macro look at the full city, because one thing that's neat about Greenville is every neighborhood is different. And I learned this walking every neighborhood and campaigning. They have different topographies, different cultures, different priorities, different vibes, for lack of a better term. And it's a remarkable thing. And I think it's one of the gifts of serving at large, that you do have that feel for the city as a whole versus maybe just a smaller 1/4 of it, which can be pretty congruous. If you're just a district rep, you can have a pretty consistent constituency. But the broad view in the at-large role, I've really enjoyed.
And that's awesome. And thank you for explaining that too, because it wasn't on my list of questions, but I was going to ask, what does that mean? I wanted listeners to learn a little bit more about what that meant. So you are not just tied to a specific district. You're able to look at the entire city.
Right. So our council is a 7-member council, and this is a little bit getting down into the weeds, but it's important to know. Our form of government is a council city manager form of government. We are not a strong mayor form of government. So what that means is that each member on council has one vote, right? No single person has a heavier weighted vote. It also means that our city manager is responsible for preparing the budget. And that budget should reflect the priorities that the 7-member council has set. So we're very different than, say, Charleston, which is a strong mayor form of government, where the mayor is responsible for the budget and leading that pathway forward. Of those 7 members, 4 represent individual districts, essentially 1/4 of the population. And the other 3, which are myself and Councilmember Stahl serving as at large, and then the mayor, the 3 of us represent the full city. So if you think about it, the district representatives, their goal is to get as much as they can for their district, right? And if you think about a great example would be infrastructure projects, right? Now, everybody works very well together. We don't have a contentious council at all. There's give and take. But that is what they were elected to do, to serve their 1/4 of the population and the geography that includes. My role is to represent the entire city. And again, making sure it's equitable across the city is a key piece of that, as well as make sure we don't, we learn from each other. Because very frequently, I might be in a meeting with a District 1 rep that the District 4 rep may have no idea what is going on in District 1. It is not their job description, right? But lessons can be learned. And we should use those lessons learned in each district to make sure they're shared across districts. And the at-large generally can make sure that happens as we stay invested in the whole.
That's awesome. And what makes you the most proud to serve the city of Greenville?
I think we've been very successful as a city despite some major unforeseen challenges. For example, when I came onto council in January of 2020, things in Greenville were very different than they were on March 14th of 2020 following the pandemic. So our council had to quickly adapt and respond to the challenges of COVID that nobody could have foreseen. I think what I'm really, really proud of is in light of that. And oh, by the way, for what it's worth, if anybody thinks we were getting memos from Washington or from Columbia to guide our decision making, I can tell you that was not happening. We were on our own. And our council reacted very quickly using our partners at the hospitals to help guide our decision making on policy. We were very quickly challenged by a lack of beds in hospitals and staff to serve people who would be in the hospital. And that's what had to drive a lot of policy decisions. And this was like nothing. There was no playbook for responding to a pandemic. But yet, I think our city came through that very, very well. In addition to coming through the pandemic very, very well, and mind you, that includes more people coming to Greenville. So a lot of people came, getting away from the larger cities, and stayed. So that happened, including governing in the midst of the murder of George Floyd. That happened that summer. So all of these things really tested us more so than you could have foreseen us being tested. In the midst of all that, we still were able to stay on schedule, on track per se, to create and adopt our comprehensive plan for growth during this period. We never stopped doing the things that we knew we had to get done, such as creating and progressing the Greenville GVL 2040 comprehensive plan. And then letting that, part of that plan was, you can go to it and look at the last page, or maybe it's a few pages back from the last page, but it basically had our to-do list. Okay, you adopt this, what next? What next to make sure that that plan does not sit on the shelf and gather dust, the proverbial metaphor for a waste of time. And we have accomplished every single item in that checklist now, sitting here 2 years later, including rewriting or writing a brand new development code, which you're very familiar with in the work that you do, a land management ordinance that had been, I think it was circa 2003 that we were still living under, that didn't match at all the growth that we needed to be able to absorb. So presenting that, adopting the new development code was another Herculean lift, but we have a very can-do attitude. We have expert staff, and being an engaged council member and reading these documents front to back was what it took to get these things across the finish line. So you asked what I'm most proud of. Those are the huge lifts that we did: the GVL 2040 comprehensive plan, the new development code, maintaining civility in the city throughout a very challenging times. Those were things that took a lot of work on behalf of council, and I think we came through it very successfully.
Absolutely. And I love that people came and they stayed.
They did. They did. And you know how I knew it? I didn't, it was very hard, get a feel for that. But I was downtown when there were protests following the murder of George Floyd. There's this, when you're an elected official, you feel the need to be present when you worry about people's safety, when you worry about, the city infrastructure, all those things. And so I was downtown, and fine, to your left and your right, there were a lot of people who were here from New York, Philadelphia, those cities. People came. What the surprise was that they stayed. You would think they'd want to go back, but of course, remote work has facilitated people making those choices.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, my own son during that time wanted to go downtown to some of the protests. He wanted to be involved, and we'd watch them from home. And it was amazing that the city was able to allow those people to express themselves and still remain in compliance, and they're very welcoming of people just expressing themselves. We have a very unique downtown area, award winning, and it's such an unfortunate circumstance that happened that allowed those people to get to know our downtown, and to be able to see that we're a small town, that we do have some nightlife, we do have some things that some of the bigger cities do. We have the best restaurants, and
I agree with all of that, and we, along with the transparency discussion a moment ago, it is people's right to protest. And sometimes it's not, protest is a pretty strong word, but, demonstrate publicly. And that is everybody's First Amendment right. I think Greenville's done a great job of keeping things peaceful. And that's critical. That, if we're not a safe city, if we don't have peace in the city, then everything else we have doesn't really matter. I'm really sorry about the dog. Should I go put her up in a moment?
Oh, they're
I think that's it. I think the mail's been delivered. We're done.
Ours is around 10:15, and I always know if I'm not at home. Of course, we have cameras, so the camera will go off, but the internal bark alarms go off when our mail lady has made her daily delivery.
Well, all right. What I just heard was the mail coming through the slot. But it's okay, because Blanche the dog is you'll see her in my social media on occasion. She's the dog of an elected official, and proud to be it.
That's right. She's letting her voice be heard this election day as well. And we've touched on this a little bit, talking about the Greenville 2040 plan. Housing affordability, of course, is a hot topic, not only nationally. I've got my questions over here, so I'm looking over here. As well. So the Greenville 2040 plan includes plans to increase affordable housing in Greenville. How has progress in this area impacted the residents?
Well, you couldn't have asked me at a better time, because we got some really good news that we were expecting, but we got the deal sealed this week. So the Greenville 2040 plan, if you step back and look at the 30,000 foot level, it is that Greenville can be a place where everyone can thrive. And for everyone to be able to thrive, they have to have access to housing. And this was certainly something that I ran on in 2019, and, have spent a lot of time invested in, what are we doing to make Greenville affordable for people of a full spectrum of incomes to live here. So there are multiple projects already completed that have affordability built into them. There are several projects under construction right now, and we can talk about each one of those if you want. I don't need to take up time if you don't want to know about them, or if it's kind of getting too much into the weeds. But we did just learn that the city was successful in earning both 9% LIHTC credit projects from the state that will be awarded in Greenville County. Both, they can only award 2 a year, and the city earned both of them. And that was announced. We basically got the letters confirming that last week. So 2 projects that I've been, I'll tell you, a frustration is when you come out of the private sector, particularly in engineering, you come into government and you see how slow things move compared to the private sector. this is something that drives me crazy. And I'm trying to like curb my expectations of progress because everything just takes a little bit longer. But there are two projects I've been talking about for 4 years now. These are the two that just got approved. So they will move forward. One of them is that will be the first to break ground as an affordable senior housing development near Unity Park. So Unity Park, one of the components of Unity Park was the provision to create affordable housing is really on the north side of the north side of the park, excuse me. So between Washington Street and the park, there's land that's set aside from that. So Southern Side Senior got approved by the state. That will advance forward and break ground very soon. And then the Alliance is another project that will be in Nickeltown, and it's going to be at the corner of Lawrence Road and Lawrence and Ackley Road. There are a couple of reasons I'm excited about that. Well, several reasons. I could find a bunch of reasons. Several reasons. One, it is a local developer who has a long track record and success in creating good projects in the affordable housing space. So that is NHE, Taylor Davis's group, and he'll be building it in conjunction with Jordan Construction, another local developer. Hint, if you're a local developer, we like that. We like that. We certainly, recognize we want to support our local developers. But the other reason I love this project is it's providing affordability in an area that's been asking it for a long time. And this particular development will be a catalytic project to help spur better development along the Lawrence Road corridor. There's a lot of room for improvement on development along the Lawrence Road corridor. And I think the Alliance, which is the name of this project, will be a real starter for that to come. So very excited about those two to get their approval last week.
Oh, and congratulations. That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the reason we get that, we earned them, is because of the city's partnership on it. There's a point system, you're probably familiar with it, but public-private partnerships are one of the many reasons for the success of Greenville. And both of those are public-private partnerships, and those, earn you points in the scoring from the state scoring, rubric. So I think having government entities at the table for it, having the support of council and the investment we've made certainly helped position us very well. And, we have a workforce demand that needs this. We are saturated on workforce. I heard Secretary Lightsey of the Commerce Department say, basically, we have more jobs than we have people in South Carolina. And that's particularly true in the upstate. So we have part of my job is to provide a workforce for people who have either brought their company here already or want to bring. So I work on that every day.
Absolutely. And on the national level, the National Apartment Association supports a bill called the YIMBY Act. And we're very fortunate that I've created and worked hard to do so relationships with the offices of course, our representative here in the area, William Timmons, with Ralph Norman and with Jeff Duncan's office. They all serve upper states membership, and they're all three part of that legislation. And we're hoping it has a good chance of getting passed this year so that we can help reduce those barriers to development. I often say this when I'm speaking at national events, I wish you guys could just come to Greenville and see how they do it.
We are leading, in my opinion. We know we are leading in the state, very much so. And I think if you look nationally, we're probably leading in that too, in getting out in front of this need for affordability. It's interesting though, Katie, and I think I might have mentioned this to you in our coffee. When Steve and I moved here in 1989, we moved from Mobile, Alabama. We started looking at apartments because we didn't know where we wanted to live and, had the time to stay in an apartment while we made that decision. Even then, we both noticed the apartment rents were significantly higher here than they were where we were coming from. And you would know better than I, being in the market, what drives that. But I want to make Greenville a place where if someone, I have two children, 31-year-old and a 29-year-old. I want them to be able to afford to come back and live and work here. And, if they're in that stage of life where they have a home, that means having affordable homes. If they're in the stage, and it's across the spectrum of income earning. If they want to live in an apartment for a little while, we want to have, a spectrum of affordability there. We need housing of all rates, right? It's the downward pressure on the least of these that's displacing people. But we need housing at above market rate, market rate and below market rate to alleviate this pressure that's forcing many people out of their homes or out of their apartments. And, I think a lot of it is we are really feeling what happened from a decade of low housing starts following the '08 crash. We're really living it now. So that's, it is what it is, but we got to play catch up.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that was a very scary time for the multifamily industry in general. I was working at Huntington Downs on Roper Mountain Road. It's a 502 unit property. They're Fannie Mae and Freddie backed most all. Hi, Patrick Kennedy. I'm talking about Sealy Realty. He's in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. But I worked for them for a very long time. And one of the things that I really liked was we were able to keep rents affordable. Like we would have people come to us. We'd often compete with the newer construction because it's not uncommon for a new development to have lease up specials. Well, as a leasing consultant, my job was to say, that's all well and good, but what's going to happen to your rate at the end of your lease agreement when this promotional period expires? Do you want to move again in a year, or do you want to lease here with me where I can tell you if you sign another lease with us, if it's a year lease, your rate of increase is going to be very minimal. And that's how they were able to be long-term investors and to keep rents more affordable. And that time I left for maternity leave. Wonderful time to have a child in an election year and all this. But I left and the occupancy was in the high 90s when I'd gone on maternity leave in October. When I came back in January, it was in the mid to low 90s, which for a 502 unit property, that's substantial. People were terrified. They were given their notices, going back and living with family. So it's no shock that the city was reluctant, or we didn't have people coming that wanted to build because of that subprime mortgage bust that happened. And like you said, we're playing catch up now for those years that we weren't able to develop.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at '09 through, up and then COVID, of course, stalled it too. Overall, there was not nearly enough built. And so here we are with a housing shortage. It's not just Greenville. It's not just South Carolina. It's all over the nation. So we're being very proactive in addressing it at the city.
Yeah, and it's great because, like I said, I go to conferences. I'll be at one that's an industry conference in Atlanta next week, and there's an affordable housing committee for the National Apartment Association, and those in the gallery can comment. And it's always cool to be able to give an opinion and say, "Hey, come to Greenville." And I remember a time when I worked for the management company I was telling you about, when the people that were developing, the civic leaders from Huntsville, they came on a bus for a tour of Greenville, and that entailed one of the owners of Sealy. They wanted to come and see, how did you guys do this? So other cities are taking note, and imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
It surely is. And for me, first of all, the whole conversation of what does affordable mean? What does workforce housing mean? That's a whole nother podcast. But for me, something I've really wanted to do and now kind of have for lack of a better term, a PowerPoint to display it. Who are the people that earn at this level? Because I think it's really interesting to dive down. We know what the income level is for, X percent AMI, all those details. I've really enjoyed. We've got to stop talking about units and start talking about people. Yes, it's a unit, but it's a people or a family that will be living in it. And what do they do for a living? And you start, relating, say, 80% of area median income is a starting out teacher or a starting out police officer. 40% area median income might be the person that's collecting your recycle every day. A nurse might be 100% area median income. And you start saying, now I value those people. I know those people add to the quality of my life. I'd like them to live here. And another shift that's happened, there used to be a time when people like to live far away from work. They didn't mind it. That commute was kind of their decompression period. Now, people are very conscious about not wanting to be in the car for any kind of lengthy commute. They're going to choose the job that's available to them in whatever their specialty is that's closest to where they live. Well, here we are in Greenville. We need teachers. We need nurses. We need police officers. We need firefighters. We need public works employees. We need all those people. And that doesn't even touch on the tourism industry. In order for them to choose to work in the city of Greenville, we have to have a place where they can live, because they could get those same jobs as far away as Simpsonville, say, and live way below the county and save that commute. So it is, again, I said this before, part of my job is to ensure the workforce is there. And that includes options for them to live close to where they have to work in the city. Two of our biggest employers are the hospital system and the school district. So we have multiple schools in the city of Greenville, and our hospitals are centered here in the city. And I'll tell you what, have a sick loved one in the hospital, something I've lived very closely in the last few months, and you will see how many people you depend on in that hospital to care for your loved one that may not necessarily have an MD by their name. It could be the person that's bringing them their meal, just as critical for their care. So it's important. It's important that we provide those spaces for people to live.
Absolutely. And I ditto what you said about the hospital employees. I've similar situation with my father over the past couple of years. And those people are golden, they're precious, and they're essential. And they've got to live somewhere. And so people don't want to commute so much. And it's to the point where, of course, every industry has advertising. The multifamily industry is no exception. And they have something that they rate communities on, and it's called a walk score. So it's how close that could be to walking to restaurants, dining, shopping, or their employer. I think we're seeing that trend in multifamily as well. People don't want those long car rides if they can avoid it.
They really don't. And it's interesting, when I got out of college, your pride was that first car you were going to buy. My benchmark is my own children, both of whom have a car, both of whom would get rid of it in a heartbeat if they could live somewhere where they could just walk to where they needed to be. And it's a generational shift. The car is not the pride and joy. The next generation values experiences. They value travel. They value recreation. It's far different. And that's a lot of what guides me. Again, the at-large, this is part of the at-large role too, that a lot of times we're working on those bigger, once in a generation kind of projects. So I recognize that some of the things that I work on day to day, I might be long gone by the time they are completed and out of the ground and completed. But I came here when I was 25. And to me, this city was remarkable. And the neighborhood we eventually settled in was remarkable. And all of those things that drew us in and that provided us that quality of life, someone had to have built for us. It didn't happen overnight. It probably was a generation before. And so I certainly feel a certain responsibility and accountability to build that for the next generation that's coming into Greenville. We have to preserve and protect the quality of life for the people who are already here and make sure we're leaving something for the next generation to come and enjoy like we have.
Absolutely. It's creating that ripple.
Yes, that's a
that
good word.
ripple effect. Absolutely. And let's see, my next question here. What is the plan to keep the 2040 vision moving forward regarding housing, and what obstacles do you foresee having to overcome?
So the plan is, as I mentioned before, I love having the Greenville 2040 plan to make a case for policy or budget items, because if I say, we said it in the GVL 2040 plan, we agreed to it, here's how we need to fund it, or here's why we need to initiate that policy. So GVL 2040 is not at risk of going away. In fact, we are actually we're required to do a 5-year update by state law. And this update has to include a resiliency component. Resiliency meaning in terms of effects of weather, catastrophic events, things like that. So it's more in the sustainability spectrum. So I'm excited about that because I think we should be asked about that. It's also sort of in my wheelhouse. And in my second term, I've tried to dig in a little deeper, maybe not on things that I might have run on the first time, but are still critically important. So I'm spending a lot of time looking beneath the ground. What lies beneath in the infrastructure, and how are we ensuring that we're taking care of it, that it can keep up with the growth? How are we funding it, right? And how are we having that forward look? And just as important, who are our partners in that? Because we can't, as a city, we can't do it alone. We have to have help from the state. We have to have help from the federal government. So working on those projects and building those relationships with our state delegation and our federal delegation is critically important. You mentioned, and I listened to your original podcast yesterday, you mentioned working with the congressman on the issue that regarding your YIMBY bill. You have to keep in constant contact with them to let them know what are the priorities of the city, what do we need, how can they help us? And that doesn't just come from calling them once every 3 years and saying, hey, we had a flood, we need this. That's a little disingenuous to do it that way. So I've tried to work really hard on starting and building those relationships and, saying, hey, here's something we need in Greenville. If you could keep your eyes out for it, or even a policy that's before either the House or the federal government that would really help us in Greenville, just keeping that dialogue open and being present and coming to see them on their turf. So to answer your question on GBL 2040, the biggest thing I do see is it growing to include the document growing to include that resiliency content. And how are we prepared for the stormwater? How are we prepared for the winds? We've just had a great test run. We're pretty darn prepared. So all of these things are part of what our engineering group is looking at and focusing. So I would expect, what are we in 2024? I would expect that in late 2025.
Awesome. And I know the plan was not to have a qualifying event to give you.
Sustainability was part of it. So open space in the environment was very much touched on in it. And we were trying to preserve 35%, I think, of the remaining developable land for green space. We actually have done very well on that mission but it comes with budget. You have to fund open space preservation, acquisition of land to preserve it. So we've been very aggressive, for lack of a better term, in making sure that we've made a number of land purchases since I've been on council. The biggest one, just down the road, buying over 6 acres in the Haney Serene neighborhood, which won't all be preserved for green space, but some darn sure will. If there's one thing that's just resonated to me so much being on council is you cannot mandate, dictate, control it unless you own it. Our measure to control things is our code. We can control uses, we can control facades, we can control mass, we can control setbacks, but it becomes a limited degree what I can say that it is. I can't stop someone from maybe bringing a bank to a site, even though everyone might have wanted another restaurant, because the private owner of that property wanted to bring the bank. And that's their right as a private owner of the property. So if you want to control its use, you better own it. And so I think the city's been very aggressive and intentional in the land that we've bought to make sure we control it or preserve it for what we value as a result of the GBL 2040 plan.
With the 2040 plan, of course, there's the component for affordable housing. What challenges have come up with trying to expand affordable housing in Greenville?
That was the second part of your question, and a great, great question. So first, we have to accept that we cannot just throw money at the problem, right? You can't just throw millions and millions of dollars at the problem and think you're going to get a solution. Some challenges are that the land that is still available for development in Greenville is very, very limited. We are a small geography, right? A lot of that land that's still developable is owned by churches, for example. I've gotten very allied and interested in a bill that I hope Representative Wendell Jones will bring forward again in this legislation that would allow churches to build affordable housing on their property, but not be taxed at the 6 mil rental rate, right? So right now they're not, if it's just green at a church, they own the land, there's nothing built on it, they're not paying property taxes on it anyway because they're a church. But without this bill, if they built an affordable home next door to their church and rented it, they would have to pay the property taxes at the 6 millage rental rate. Well, that's crazy. Definitely disincentivizing them to do just that, which may be part of their mission. So that's a big chunk of land that's not being used, perhaps for the priorities that the church may have. Another challenge is, I mentioned earlier the 9% LIHTC, low-income housing tax credits from the state. This is the only avenue I have found to make the numbers pencil out to build in the deeply affordable levels, perhaps the below 50% of area median income levels. Those low-income housing tax credit projects right now in this year that we're in, we get a maximum of 2 in Greenville County. So Greenville County could get 0, 1, or 2 approved. And I just mentioned a moment ago, the city of Greenville got both. In those, the number of units is a maximum of 100. So at best, we could get 200 more units per year. Well, the QAP is qualifying package, whatever. The rules are changing in 2025, and the SC Housing is reducing that to only 1 per year per county and only 80 units max. So going forward, the most we'll be able to do in that deep level of affordability with the low-income housing tax credits is a property 80 units big, and it could be way out in the county or it could not happen at all. So it's a step backwards, in my view. It's not helping the problem. We're talking to our state delegation about it, but people need to be aware of it. That is a challenge. And on top of that, things like construction costs, utility tap fees are a big piece of it. It always comes down to making the pro forma work. And these projects operate on extremely thin margins.
Yes, absolutely. And we have the breakdown on the national level when we go to DC and we're lobbying for the industry. We break down those costs, and very little goes back to the landlord. It's like 7 cents on a dollar. Like I said, the profit margins are very small. Is there anything that listeners could do to help voice concerns over that limitation being placed in the state of South Carolina, such as contacting their state delegation, or what options are there to push back on this?
Well, and I think it's, if you support affordable housing, this backward step makes it all the more difficult for us to do. So, contact your state representative. First of all, you should always, this is how to advocate, always let them know, A, if you're a constituent of theirs, are you in their district? And B, thank them for their service. It's just a good way to open and to close, honestly. I mean, it is service. Let them know that you want more affordability in South Carolina, and that the upcoming, you might need to put it in the chat, but the upcoming 2025 SC housing regulations are going to make it more difficult. And we prefer they not do that. I mean, I would be hopeful they would have expanded the program. They're actually contracting. So that's going to be a real problem for us. It's hard enough. Contracting it is going to make it even hard. Doesn't mean we're going to stop trying. I mean, we're in it every day trying to make the numbers work to get projects across, to development.
Absolutely. We're happy to help. I chair the state advocacy and legislative committee and for the South Carolina Apartment Association, and we're working on our 2025 priorities. This is something that I'm going to take back and let our committee know about, because we're very much advocates of housing affordability and progressing the number, like you said, units equate to families. So that's less families, less people that we can reach and serve as a community.
Well, and I'm looking up the bill number of Wendell Jones. And families equate to people in the workforce that we depend on. I can't stress that enough. Again, if you connect the dots of our Secretary of Commerce for the state of South Carolina, a brilliant man, has said, we are at workforce saturation. Okay. That means getting people to fill the jobs that we have is all the more difficult. We have more jobs than we have people to fill them. And so if we're making it harder to provide housing for a workforce, we're just working against ourselves in that. We have the beauty here. In the city of Greenville, we have recreation, we have the beauty, we have mobility. We've got more work to do for sure, but I don't think we compete with very rural areas in terms of attracting people who want to live here. But our challenge is making sure that everyone has access to those quality of life things, that everyone who wants to be here and work here has a place they can live in and afford, has access to recreation, and has mobility options. The bill, and now here's a little, I hope maybe your kids who are studying government have it better. So Representative Jones, who I just have a lot of respect for, he's doing a great job representing his district. He introduced it as in last year's session, House Bill 4544, H 4544. I called Wendell a month or so ago and I said, Wendell, I'm going to help you get that bill across because one thing I can do is reach out to constituents and ask them to ask for support. And I said, will it get the same bill number assigned to it if you reintroduce, they're starting the first of the 2 year. And I am not sure of that question, of that answer. Will it get the same bill number or does it get assigned a new number? But if you go to our state legislator's webpage and look up H 4544, that's the bill we're talking about. And he's really hopeful he can get it across the line. It got held up in committee last session, but he's hoping to get it moving forward. And I'm going to help him do that for sure.
Awesome. And that's scstatehouse.gov that folks would go to. And there's a legislation tracker there. There's an app also for SC Legislature that people can download from either the Apple Store or from the Google Play Store, where they can track legislation such as that. And I think it's going to change. If I'm not mistaken, it'll get a new bill number because we had a bill that we were trying to get passed last year, which was H 4158, and that's domestic violence in rental properties, that would have allowed a leaseholder to be able to be released from their lease agreement should they find themselves the victim of domestic violence. And we were so close this year. We just had one senator 2 days before sine die had some concerns regarding the red flag laws. So we're trying to overcome those this coming year under the impression that, of course, is going to get a new bill number 2. And we're thinking that Jason Elliott may introduce that. I mean, of course, we have elections today, so we'll know.
Jason Elliott won't be introducing it as a representative. He's going
nope.
for the Senate, so.
Exactly.
Well, and I think the lesson is some things you have to be tenacious and not get tired, just be persistent. Things you really believe in. When I look back on my life over time, that's been the name of the game. You just have to have a stick-to-itiveness and a belief that what when you're fighting for something, if you really believe, if you stick to your values, then it's worth fighting for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I use the term from, I believe it is a poem, and the end is like, and there are miles to go before I sleep. When you're called to a higher purpose, when you're working in your purpose, that kind of comes naturally where you're like, I'm not going to let this discourage me this year. The work continues. And remembering, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
I used to say to my kids when they were teenagers, and even when they were in college, I'm not even close to tired yet parenting you. And I'm not even close to tired yet in the role that I hold. So every day is a new day. I get asked a lot, do you ever get, it always is framed around a question of, do you like your job? Right. And, I'll quickly say which job, because I have a job as an elected official and I have a job as a small business owner. And they always want to know about my job as an elected official. I love what I do. And honestly, Katie, in any given day, there can be highs and lows. There really can. But never have I ended a day saying, oof, this was an awful day. It just has not happened. And, what a privilege to have such a job. It's a real honor to serve, and I love what I do. And not always do I end a discussion with a constituent with we agree, but we always can peacefully agree to disagree. And, my job is to represent everybody. And I think I've been doing the best job I can do and working extremely hard at it. And it's been a labor of love. My husband and I always say we are so lucky that Greenville found us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in serving the people, if you could design for them your ideal community, what would it consist of? What would that look like?
Well, I think about the things, I think I live in an ideal community, but I love a community that's walkable. So let's talk about, there are infrastructure things and then there are people/vibe things. I love a walkable community. I respect that it should be bikeable also. I'm not a cyclist. I rely heavily on the cycling lobby to guide me and inform me on what's important to them. I'm a runner, so I appreciate good traffic management and safety on the roads. I have a real appreciation for being walkable to, say, a grocery store. And I guess that's because of where I was brought up, Katie, being raised in New York City I was the first person in our family afford to own a car. Then that's what I bought out of college. My family never had a car, and you walk everywhere in New York and you're very reliant on public transportation. And I love that access and that flexibility. Here in Greenville, we're always going to be car reliant. We are not a New York City or an Atlanta or a Charlotte, but I want our communities to have a choice, that you have a choice of walking or taking your car or taking your bike. I want our communities to have a tree canopy. We've just lost a lot of it. We will have to step back, in my view, and I talked with the city manager about this. We had a tree plan, we have a tree fund, we had data on our tree canopy before our tree ordinance, but Helene has changed that. Our challenge going forward is going to be that let me just say a large percentage. I don't want to say it till we get the actual data, but obviously a huge percentage of the canopy we lost is on private property. So how do we partner with our community to rebuild the canopy? It's going to take everybody coming to the table. I also want our community to be mixed age, right? I think so. When we moved onto our block, we were the young whippersnappers on the block. They used to call people, have you ever heard the term dinks? Dinks were double income, no kids, DINK, double income, no kids. That was us. Then we had babies, and we were the ones on the block with the babies. Now, unfortunately, we're the old people on the block. But we have this fabulous block of people with new kids being born all the time. And that's just part of what makes a community great, is when you have people from all different perspectives living in an area and helping one another. If we ever doubted that our community would come together for each other, we shouldn't anymore after Helene. Everybody was helping everyone. And quite frankly, in a time when there is a lot of civil discord, Helene showed us that in Greenville, we will have none of that. But we're still at risk. We're still at risk for that. And it's so critical that we keep, a peaceful community, a bipartisan or nonpartisan local government. We are a partisan local government. We're very unique in the city, and we'll stay that way. But we don't operate on city council on partisanship. There are things we disagree on, but we solve them peacefully. And that's critical. And quite frankly, that is to some degree. So we have to protect all that.
Absolutely. And that sense of community is something that is vital to the future protection of our society as a whole. And
I haven't mentioned them because I don't overlap a lot with them, but we should be thankful that we have the public school system that we do. Greenville County is the largest public school system in the state, one of the largest in the nation. And my children were raised in public schools and got a great education. They had access to challenging classes, and not every community has that. But that's a critical part of the community, is having, schools where the families are involved and where the kids feel safe and nurtured and are getting educated.
Absolutely. I agree. My son is a sophomore in a Greenville County school, and they have amazing supportive services for him and for others I call them neurospicy brains that need a little more guidance to get through their day to day. And I cannot thank his educators enough. And it's been across the board from kindergarten through now. And they include a plan for college for supporting the students long after graduation day. And you don't find places like Greenville. That it's so rare, and we're like incredibly, incredibly fortunate, like you said, to have a school system.
Another part of what makes a community, and again, this might be for another podcast, but our small business owners downtown and throughout the community are small business owners. And these are the people that might be your neighbor or professionals. This is a small little quick story. So my husband and I were going to see his cardiologist for the first time. And I realized that he was in high school with my daughter. So I had a little bit of apprehension, like, oh my gosh, my husband's cardiologist is pretty close in age to my daughter, which is 31. And so when we first saw him, I said, well, Dr. So-and-so, you may not know this, but I know who you are, because I remembered his name from the high school days. And he said, oh, and I said, you were in school with my daughter at Greenville High, go Red Raiders. And he said, well, I know who you are. And I thought, oh, he must know I'm an elected official. And he said, so I said, oh, you do? And he said, Yes, you live 3 doors up from me. So he lives 3 doors that way. But here's what's so cool about that is that he said, I do remember your daughter because we have our last name is spelled uniquely. So he said, but I've been following your case, your husband's case from the time he was sick. And so I'm well familiar with his history. And I just thought, that's the kind of doctor I have in my community and my neighbor taking care of my husband. And that's part of our secret sauce is that kind of dedication and that kind of community.
Absolutely. And a funny sidebar story too. I was going to say it offline, but I'm an open book. It's the real spill. My hematologist,
Yeah.
Dr. Walls, wanted
I
me to
just saw
tell
him
you.
yesterday. Okay.
Yeah.
He's my husband's hematologist.
Really?
Yes. Yes. And he lives around the corner from me down in Cleveland Park. Small world.
Yes. I don't care that people know this. I was recently diagnosed with iron deficiency anemia, not uncommon for a woman my age, but saw Dr. Walls and was like, oh, what do you do? And I told him I was starting a podcast and I was very excited to have you on. And he said, oh, please tell her hello. She helped my children through SAT prep.
A client of mine. So we saw him yesterday because Steve has low iron. This is all related to his cardiac situation. And I knew he looked so familiar, but I just couldn't figure. It was years ago that I worked with his family. And then he said, what's your first name? And I said, it's Dorothy. And he said, I know you. We work together. But again, our community is very lucky to have great medical care. I mean, thankfully, most people do not have to experience the need for critical medical care. But if you do, I mean, the man who saved my life works at Prisma Hospital and he lives a few blocks from me and he no doubt saved my husband's life. And I'm just grateful we have infrastructure, that system to be a thriving community. And a lot of that is why people are moving here. They see that, that's not going to change.
That's amazing. That is amazing. And one thing, I know we're getting a little long on our time. If we need to I'd love to have you on again, but I wanted to get through this next question because we talked about it earlier this year. You were looking for a specific shade of green because the Today Show was coming to Greenville. How was that experience when bringing the Today Show to Greenville?
That was great. And first of all, can we just say, the Today Show came to Greenville. It was fantastic. Stephanie, who was the host, was lovely. Her family was there. Myself and our city manager and many, probably a couple of dozen of our staff were there. And it's so neat to me to hear reach outs from people I grew up with in New York that say, I keep hearing about Greenville. What's going on? Greenville must be something. And I'll say, everything you hear is true. Everything you hear is true. It's an incredible place. Please come to visit and plan on staying with me. I just am immensely proud of our city. Immensely proud of our city. And, I hope I've been helpful in this role in keeping people informed on things that affect them that I think they should be aware of and how we are managing our growth. And we just renovated our house to be that age in place house. So we're set to be here for forever. And, if I could have anything, it would be for my children to move back here. But that's a decision they'll make in the long run. I'm just fortunate that we discovered it. It really was a fluke, but we're very grateful. And I'll be here for the long haul.
So did the Today Show did you guys just get a call one day, like from a producer?
It actually came through our Visit Greenville Tourism Board. And so one of the people that works with them, Terrence Scherer, is amazing and has great contacts. And I think she got it all lined up. And they were picking 2 sites in the state of South Carolina. And they picked Hilton Head and Greenville. They sent Al Roker to Hilton Head. And of course, Al Roker is much more well-known than Stephanie is. So we got Stephanie and people, I wish we had Al. Well, Al was down in Hilton Head in the rain. We had Stephanie up here in the most beautiful day. And she was so gracious. She stayed over a couple nights with her family just to show them. So it was great.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. And I guess we've already talked about what keeps you up at night a little bit. Anything else you'd want to add to that?
Again, what keeps me up at night is making sure that we maintain partnerships and the civility that has gotten us this far. And I'm looking at it, from the leadership perspective. I think we have a very solid comprehensive plan, Greenville 2040 for growth. We have a very solid development code that has been adopted and that we look at every 6 to 12 months to make revisions as needed, because you never get it perfect the first time. And we've been on schedule for that. I've demonstrated strong leadership on council in championing those items and more. And I think that's really important about our success moving forward and working together and, keeping Greenville the special place that it is for the people who have chosen to stay here, and listening to all perspectives and valuing what's important to people and investing in those things to make sure we preserve them.
And you mentioned the future. Care to share plans for future public service?
Well, I love public service. I am thrilled to be now in the beginning of my second term on council. It's given me the opportunity to not only keep championing the things I have been championing, but add in, we talked about kind of pulling in some sustainability issues in terms of infrastructure. We didn't even touch on undergrounding, but more to come on that, undergrounding our electrical lines. But I think it is critical that we have good leadership on city council for us to move forward. And I think I've served well on that and will intend to continue to serve on council, in leadership as long as the people will allow me to.
Awesome. And not to pressure you, but I know that the mayor is not seeking reelection after this term. Would you consider
Of course.
running for mayor? Yay.
There's so much work still to be done. And you have to have, it's important to have, first of all, at this point, I got a lot of institutional knowledge on the things. Like I know what GBL 2040 is, and having the context that those policies were adopted under is critical to carrying them forward. You have to know where we were and what the priorities were to move them forward. And our council priorities have remained consistent. We've worked very well together. I've been very fortunate to serve as the liaison to the commissions that I've liaison to the Visit Greenville Board, to Greenville Transit Authority, our Greenlink bus system, to the airport, and then working with the neighborhoods all our neighborhood associations are so wonderful, and the leadership knows me well, and they know I am just a text, a phone call, or an email away. I'm just really honored to serve and hope that Greenville will let me to continue to serve and help however I can.
And that's refreshing to hear, because it's obvious, as someone who's followed you on social media and can say firsthand, you are very, very responsive, very approachable. And I'm hoping through our talk today that listeners are seeing that our elected officials are people.
Absolutely. People and responsive. I mean, I always tell people, I used to say, Katie, I said, if you don't hear from me in 24 hours, you will hear from me in 24 hours. Okay. I was probably a little aggressive on that. Now it could take a couple of days, but if you don't hear from me, it means something went wrong. It went to my spam, something like that. Not to say I don't make errors and, miss something, but it's never my intent to not respond. A question or a concern or a issue from a constituent. It's a lot of why I ran, is I felt like not necessarily did I feel like everyone who represented me was responsive to me when I reached out to them. And I just think that's so, so important. It's so funny when they call me, they'll say, I hate to bother you, and I quickly correct them and say, I work for you. I have 70,000 bosses who are the people who live in Greenville, but I also have bosses who are those stakeholders in Greenville, the business owners in Greenville. I work for them. So therefore, I have to be, and I very much want to be responsive to their concerns.
Absolutely. And it's very much appreciated. And we want to welcome you to continue to attend any Upper State Apartment Association event that you
Thanks for asking me.
Of course. Absolutely. And I always end my podcast with a question. Of course, I love music.
You're a rap fan, right?
I am. But now with the lawsuit that would not be named, some of the people that I've listened to over the years, I'm having to refrain from maybe dropping some lyrics here or there because of That. Oh, my goodness. I may have to go back and see the therapist about this myself. This has been alarming, but very much a rap fan. But I love to hear from my guest as to what their favorite song is and why.
This is so hard. Because I saw you might be asking that question. And so music has evolved for me over time. So I was raised loving Fleetwood Mac, Elton John, Led Zeppelin, that era, right? And then in college, it was Thriller came out and Gap Band, Jeffrey Osborne, loved them. And then post college, it's basically whatever LP I had purchased during those previous times. And I must qualify this to say both my husband and my son are music aficionados. Like they are expert in the field. So they've introduced me to a lot of different music that I wouldn't normally have, like John Prine. I never would have known John Prine were it not for my husband and my son. So I think my favorite songs come from those different eras. If I'm trying to get geared up for something, I might listen to Start Me Up from the Rolling Stones. If I'm feeling retrospective, I might listen to Madman Across the Water, Elton John. If I'm feeling just, deep in thought, I might listen to In the Evening, Led Zeppelin. But then there are songs that stand out that just kind of speak to you from a story standpoint. So I was looking through my Spotify library walking today, and the song Starting Over, Chris Stapleton, this isn't the song that I go to every time, but I just love the story of how authentic he is to his music and how his wife is the one that told him he could do it. He could go out on his own and being successful. And that song is really a love story between the two, because I think about how encouraging my husband has been to me over the years. We were best friends, and then we became more than best friends, and then we got married, and we spent our careers together, and now he's my greatest cheerleader. And it's, when you have a partner like that in life, you recognize how critical that is to your own happiness and to your own success. And so I just love listening to that song. Today, that was my favorite song. Tomorrow, it could be something else.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful story.
It's not a great answer, to you. I wish I could give you one. But I was going through my library and I thought, is this it? No, I love that one. And it just, they're all nostalgic for me. And more are coming in every day because I'll I follow my son on Spotify and I'll take in his playlists and learn about more music. And, I'm an open book on music. I'm not a rap fan. I have to say rap isn't my thing. And I'm not a Swiftie. Sorry. I don't have any aversion to either one, but they're just not the things I subscribe to.
I feel you there. You can appreciate their work and their catalog without having to be a full-fledged.
And what a successful businesswoman she is. She's the one who took Apple to task, right? And I'm like, you've got to get it. That was her intellectual property. And I just really respect her as an expert in her field and the businesswoman that she is. And a great dancer and a great singer and a great writer.
Absolutely. We have a member of our team that's over 2 Taylor Swift fan clubs, and she just got to see her in Miami, and it was such a phenomenal experience for her. And I love that for her. She has a way of reaching her fans and connecting with them in a very unique and meaningful way to them. And There's nothing wrong with that as an artist. It's okay to appreciate the art. And
I think she's fantastic. I mentioned this at a Visit Greenville annual meeting, speaking on music, those proud moments in Greenville, like just the things it's like, boy, I remember that day. I remember that day. And there are several in the time that I've lived here, but one was the Eagles. To my knowledge, the Eagles have played here twice. Once was when my son was in 3rd grade, so a long time ago. And then once about a couple of years ago, could have been 18 months, 2 years ago. And it was sold out, and my husband and I were there. And there are some songs that the Eagles play with a symphony background when it's recorded. And so they started playing whatever song it was, and you heard a symphony background. And I presumed that symphony was pre-recorded and being played over the speakers, and they were playing live. Well, about one verse into it, the curtain behind them came up, and it was the Greenville Symphony playing behind the Eagles. And it was just that moment of how proud we're. The Bon Secours Wellness Arena was on its feet, and it was not only because everybody loved that song and loved the Eagles, but just the fact that our own Greenville Symphony Orchestra was there playing behind them, and that they were good enough for the Eagles to say, yeah, we want them playing behind us, and that they had that much pride, and that they kept it such a secret. Oh my gosh, I don't know how they kept that a secret until that moment.
Yeah, that would they'd have to sign some type of like NDA or something.
I don't know, but let me tell you, they were tight. They played tight, and that was it's a real moment of pride that our community has that here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of the arts that are here. And a friend of mine sings with the Greenville Chorale, and they perform with the Greenville Symphony. And I'm hoping that they'll do their annual cantata this holiday season.
Probably so. They were at their opening night. And is Bing Vick still director for the chorale? I think he's about to retire, but he used to be the choir director at my church in the early 1990s. So that's how long he's been with the Greenville Chorale. Yeah.
A friend of mine got to sing. She had to be very tight-lipped about it, but she's, of course, in the Greenville Chorale, got tapped to sing with Andrea Bocelli.
Another crowd. Oh my gosh. Were you there for that concert? It was incredible. Incredible. I mean, just incredible.
And I love that they're tapping into our local art and artistry. And just another shameless plug for Greenville. We have such talent in the Greenville Theater.
We do. The Greenville Theater and artists born. I mean, hello, Marcus King is from Greenville. All these great names were, people have left Greenville and made a national name and then don't come back. But I just think it's remarkable, all the components we have for someone to live a dream coming from here.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. And with that, I think we'll call it. And I want to thank you again, Dorothy, for joining me on this episode of The Real Spill, and appreciate you joining me. And hopefully you'll come back.
Absolutely. Love to come back.
And that's a wrap on today's episode of The Real Spill, a podcast where I spill on all things multifamily advocacy and how we as industry professionals can work together with our elected officials, stakeholders, and allies to bring about change for the rental housing industry. Thank you for joining me. I hope you've learned something new. Now, go be a voice. Until next time, Spills out.